and welcome to BEaTS Research Radio, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to communicating science to the community. My name is Tuba B, and I'll be your host on today's episode discussing the latest research on antiviral drug development with our special guest, Dr. Joanne Lemieux. Professor Lemieux is a professor of structural biology at the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. She is the director of the Membrane Protein Disease Research Group and studies the structures of membrane proteins that are critical to diseases such as breast cancer, Parkinson's disease, and urinary tract infections in an effort to identify novel therapeutic strategies. Most recently, during the COVID-19 pandemic, as the principal investigator on the study, Dr. Lemieux worked to develop an antiviral drug against the coronavirus disease. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lemieux.
Thank you very much for having me.
So to begin our interview, I was wondering if you could explain to us some of the current research efforts underway at your lab.
Yeah, so our lab has undertaken research projects to develop antivirals to treat viral infections associated with coronavirus, and this would be to help treat COVID-19.
Thank you so much. And you and your research team at the University of Alberta have recently discovered antiviral protease agents that interfere with the SARS-CoV-2 virus's ability to replicate itself. Could you briefly explain the mechanism that the antiviral agents use to do this?
Sure. So we know that coronaviruses infect people with their nucleic acid, and this is then translated into a long polyprotein. So this has multiple proteins in this polyprotein. And within the virus, there's an enzyme called a protease, and the protease chops up part of the virus particles. And this helps it enable to replicate itself in the cells. And if we can inhibit that protease, what we do is in essence, inhibit the replication of that virus. So this is a bona fide target for treatment of viral infections. We know from historically hepatitis C and HIV viruses have been able to be treated using protease inhibitors. And so we're very optimistic that we can develop an inhibitor against the protease for COVID, for SARS-CoV-2, and to develop a coronavirus antiviral.
Yes, thank you so much. And how are these antiviral agents similar or different from other current drugs under development?
Right. So an antiviral medication would be something to treat someone who has a coronavirus infection. So this is very different than a vaccine. So vaccine is the first line of defense against prevention within a person, as well as spread in the community. So an antiviral wouldn't replace vaccination. But it can be used to treat people who have infections. So we do know that there's some immunocompromised parts of the population who cannot take the vaccine. So this would be very useful for them. Also, there's also parts of the world where vaccine dissemination has been very challenging. And so this will be very useful for those people as well.
Thank you so much. And my next question is, you mentioned in a recent interview that you hope to develop a treatment that could be taken as a pill as opposed to a drug that can only be injected intravenously in a hospital. What impact do you think antiviral COVID-19 pills will have on the research of future drugs and other high-risk pathogens?
Right. So yes, our overall goal really is to develop an oral antiviral. So this will really help bring the treatment to various populations around the world. Currently, to have an IV formulation means you have to typically be in a hospital setting. So an oral formulation would really help or enable further distribution in the community. Now, that being said, we do know that Pfizer just released a few weeks ago information about stage 3 clinical trials for their oral antiviral that targets protease for COVID-19's virus, SARS-CoV-2. And so we're very optimistic about this, that their phase 3 clinical trials were very promising, which meant it's safe in humans and it's worked to decrease the amount of infection in humans. However, the delivery of this oral medication is still happening in the hospital setting. And so it really hasn't gone to wide scale market yet. But this tells us that we're on the right track and that developing an inhibitor that targets the protease in the virus is really one of the best ways moving forward, so that in the future, to treat the current COVID-19 infection and possibly future coronavirus outbreaks, having an oral antiviral will be very helpful.
Yeah, really hope that that process can happen as soon as possible. My next question is, you have been working with an X-ray crystallography procedure to help make the protease more effective inhibitors. Could you explain for those who may not know what the X-ray crystallography technique is, as well as why the chemical design process is important for drug development?
Right. Yeah. So my lab is a structural biology lab. And so what we do is we look at the three-dimensional shape of proteins. And this really helps us see exactly how drugs will fit and bind into certain crevices or pockets in the protein. And this procedure really is on the surface very simple. We purify proteins, and then we precipitate them out of solution in this organized fashion, almost like crystallizing salt. And then we expose the crystals to X-ray beams at a special facility called a synchrotron. And we can look at the way the X-rays reflect off the crystals. And from that, we can interpret the three-dimensional shape and the structure. And so this is really quite exciting, and it informs us on how to further enhance drug development and drug design. And so this procedure has been used for decades to really facilitate structure-guided drug design. And yeah, it's a really fun field, and very informative for our work.
Yes. And my final question is, moving forward, what are some of the next steps your lab plans to focus on? Do you think an antiviral pill is likely to be developed in the near future by your lab? Just any future directions that you hope to move forward with?
Well, one of the main things that our lab is looking at right now, besides developing some new antiviral derivatives that we hope to be very effective, is that we're also looking to see whether or not these antivirals that target the protease of coronavirus actually work on variants of coronavirus. So we know there's lots of variants of concern circulating worldwide. This includes the Delta variant. And these variants have changes in the protein found in the different viruses. And our preliminary data suggests that the antivirals still work on variants of the original coronavirus. So this really, we find optimistic results, suggesting that the protease inhibitor will likely still work against variants of concern.
Thank you so much, Professor Lemieux, for joining us today. And thank you to all BEaTS listeners for your time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram channels at BEaTS Research. BEaTS Research Radio is supported by the Ottawa Heart Institute and the University of Ottawa. We hope to see you all next week.